So validation and a database is missing. Now I'll start by adding validation here. And for that, I'll quit my server-side npm start process because I need to install a new package. And I'll use the same package which I used in the validation module of this course. Therefore, you should definitely watch that module to learn how validation works, because I'll not repeat everything here. We already learned it after all. So here I'll just install that package, which was Express Validator. That is a package that helps us with implementing validation into our NodeJS applications. After that is installed, you can restart npm start. And now, do you remember how you add it? Have a look at this module I just mentioned if you don't. You go to your routes, and there you add some middleware which does that validation. For that, you first of all need to import something from the Express Validator package, and there from the /check sub package. And that something is either the check method or the body method to check the request body, or with the check method also the headers, the query parameters, and so on. I want to check the request body here. Now, for the get route, validation makes no sense because no data is submitted, but for the post route, it makes sense. And there I'll add an array of middleware that will be applied, which will be related to validation. There, for example, I will use body to check the title field. Now, the title field can be validated in any way you want. I can tell you that on the front end, however, I am validating that title field. And you can see that in the components, feed edit component, that I am validating this to have a minimum length of 5 characters and to be non-empty, which is of course the case if it is at least 5 characters long. The content also has to be 5 characters long. So that's just a little side note on what I'm doing on the front end, and the back end should of course meet that same pattern. So my body title will first of all be trimmed to not have any white space in there. And then I'll use the isLength validator with an object to set a minimum length of 5. Now, this is the title. Now, after a comma, I'll add my next middleware where I will validate the content. We can also trim that and basically set the same validator. Obviously, you can be more creative than that, but I just want to reiterate how validation works and really show you that it works in exactly the same way in REST APIs, because you build a normal Node and Express application in the end. That does not change here. So with that, we added these 2 validation steps for our incoming data, for the title and the content, and now we can implement some logic to send an error if our server-side validation logic is not met. For this, we go to our controller, to the feed.js file in the controllers folder, and there we also need to import something from that Express Validator package. So here I also require Express Validator /check, and that something which I'm importing here is the validation result function. With that imported in create post, we can simply create a new errors constant and use that validation result function on the request. It will then automatically extract any errors that validation package gathered. We can check if not errors is empty, which means we have errors. If that is not empty, we have errors. And then it will return a response with a status code of 422, which is of course our validation failed status code, where I send some JSON data. And there you can have a message of validation failed, entered data is incorrect, or whatever you want. It'll be on your front end to do something with that message or not. And you could add the errors here by using that errors constant and then using the array method to extract an array of errors and also add this to the JSON object. So with that, we're returning this response if validation fails. Now, thanks to our client-side validation, with the correct rules, we could not reproduce that because I'm already checking for a minimum length of 5 on the front end. But if we increase the title minimum length to 7 for now on the server, now if I go back to the front end and I enter a title which is only 5 characters long, and therefore long enough for the client-side validation, but too short for the server-side validation, which is of course a mismatch you don't want to have in a real app, but it's great for testing. If I do that and I accept here, I actually get an error, creating or editing a post failed. That is an error message I'm just showing on the front end. But if we have a look at our console log in the DevTools, we see a 422 error here. And if we click on that, we're taken to the network tab. We see that red request. And if we inspect that, we see our response here. And that indeed has that message we sent on the server side, validation failed, and so on. And it has this errors array where we see that the title failed. So you see that the server-side validation is working, and that is all I wanted to show you here. Of course, I revert back to 5 characters minimum length on the server now too, so that the client-side validation logic and the server-side logic are in line. Otherwise, we would have very bad user experiences because users get the feedback that their input is correct, and then the server would throw an error. So with that, we added validation for this post route, and now we can move on to adding a database.